I know I've made a video already going over why I think capitalism doesn't work, and there are probably more arguments I could make, but really I think anarcho-capitalism deserves its own video.
Fasten your seatbelts, it's gonna be a bumpy night!
It's far from any capitalism we've ever seen today, and
I just want to remind everyone that I did a video on the definition of capitalism, the definition used by mainstream economists. Again, if you want to discuss economics, you have to use economic definitions. So that video goes over it. Now, who wants to bet he's using the word capitalism completely wrong? Actually, I can't take any of your bets on that because no bookie will touch it.
honestly, the more I've learned about it, the more it scares me.
Wow. So, Edward Snowden reveals how much governments are spying on their own citizens, but this is what scares you. Government kills infants by drone strike and calls them fun-sized terrorists, but this is what scares you. Governments all over the world commit over 260 million murders over the course of the 20th century when there were only 9 million murders at private hands, but this is what scares you. Government drops 2 nuclear bombs on cities full of non-combatants, killing hundreds of thousands of them and sentencing untold others to suffering by radiation poisoning out of nothing more than sheer petulance. But this is what scares you.
One of the first things that comes to mind is what about the police and emergency services?
Well, we've seen over and over again why private alternatives to these work quite well. What else you got?
So this means that if you cannot afford to pay for private security,
We don't need to go any further, do we? I mean, how many times do we have to debunk something before we can just say, come up with something new? And by the way, why is it up to us to respond to it in the first place? I mean, we have, not that you know it from watching people like Xexizy, but why do they not have any impetus whatsoever to prove what they're saying is true? I mean, they're the ones asserting only the rich would have it, so, okay, what's your evidence that this would be the case? No one is under any obligation to disprove something you never bothered to prove.
but I suppose there would be no such thing as crime because there'd be no such thing as law either.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break. Just shut your pie hole, for goodness sake.
So what different companies would enforce would vary.
No, they'd only be able to employ defensive force. And notice you're also ignoring the efficacy of an armed populace, something else we've demonstrated over and over again, even though the burden of proof is on you, not us.
So this basically means unless you own private property, you're exposed to pretty much anything people want to do to you.
Everyone owns private property because everyone owns themselves. Even if you're homeless and have no possessions whatsoever, you still get to defend any offense against your person, which means that any other organization can act in your defense as well. But does this moron honestly think that private security companies would be able to just attack people out of the blue just because they don't own property? How does this make any sense? So not only do people like him not do anything to back up their claims, they don't even seem that interested in having their claims make sense on the face of it.
Without a state or any way for people to make decisions as a collective,
Did you catch the part he skipped over? Why does anyone have to make decisions as a collective? Is that even logically possible? He just makes the assumption and skips over that part. In fact, statism being the religion it is, he probably doesn't even realize he skipped over it. It's sort of like when creationists ask who created the universe. Well, who said it was a who? Who said it was even created? They're operating on the very assumptions that we're attacking.
everyone really is at the mercy of corporations.
And of course, you can't have corporations in an anarchy, but he just blows past that one too.
As they would be the only people with any power.
Let's be generous and say that by corporation he really meant business. But again, he makes the assumption that they would have power, indeed that there would even be any power to have. Once again, this is another assumption that we're attacking, and he just assumes that it's the case and goes on with it. And he never even tries to support it.
There wouldn't be anything wrong with a corporation hindering your own personal liberties.
The populace would be armed, so let them try. But really, what's he worried about Amazon doing? Or Google? What actions would they even be interested in doing if they found themselves operating in an anarchy? He doesn't even specify what the fear actually is. It's vague and implied.
But I guess it's only bad when a state does it, right?
Strawman, I can't stand it when you spew it over and over again. How much can a person take? Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Which, by the way, you'll most likely be working extremely long hours as there's not anything to stop corporations from making you at the threat of losing your job.
You do realize that working hours drop under capitalism, right? You have heard of this thing called competition, right? Without your blessed government regulating the bejesus out of everything, why would any worker put up with it when they could easily get a job somewhere else or start their own business? For that matter, why would companies even want to do that to their workers to begin with? Another assumption he doesn't even try to support.
ANCAPs do not believe that in a true market, monopolies will form.
Because it's impossible. We've demonstrated it's impossible. Even though the burden of proof is not on us. And you've done absolutely nothing whatsoever to show that they would.
But let's look at the private security idea again, and here's an example of what's going to happen. Hey, we're a new security company that would love your business. Oh, can you guys offer more protection than my current service? Well, seeing as we're smaller, no.
Why does he think that answer would be no? If anything, the smaller outfit would have more of an incentive to offer greater protection for their customers. They also wouldn't have the diseconomies of scale their big competitors would, since security necessitates manpower. So, again, embedded assumption. Small companies can't provide as much security. Amount of support he gives for this assumption? Absolutely none whatsoever.
Seeing as an extremely successful company could just go ahead and buy out every other company in a certain industry in the first place.
Again, level of support, 0. And again, we have a response. As history shows, this is unsustainable, like when Standard Oil tried buying out their smaller competition. More and more competition kept springing up, a lot of it specifically for the purpose of selling to Standard Oil. In fact, many of them had sold out to Standard Oil before and had made multiple startups, selling to them multiple times. All Standard Oil were doing was creating a market for oil startups.
We already see today that when companies own media, the content of the media platform is always skewed to support the interests of the company that owns it.
So, make it a free market and allow competition. Simple.
What's worse is that people would have no idea what to believe.
Unless they do this thing called critical thinking. I know it's a foreign concept to you, Xexizy, but you should try it sometime.
But socialists want to make this problem better by removing profit as an incentive.
And how does that make it better? Do you think people will suddenly stop being biased if they weren't making money? If anything, their bias would be the only reason they would have to do it in the first place, since they wouldn't have the alternative incentive of money. All you're really doing is making it next to impossible for new people to enter the market to offer different points of view.
Freedom ends when it limits other people's freedoms.
Yes, and that's why we're against people like you. Who wants to bet he's going to try and turn that around, though?
But from what I can tell, ANCAPs only want freedom for anyone running a business.
Yeah, none of our bookies would touch that one either. And notice how he's conveniently ignoring the fact that with anarcho-capitalism, anyone can create a business at any time. In fact, there would be no distinction whatsoever between a business that's a sole proprietorship and what an individual is just doing on his own. Business would be a verb, not a noun.
What happens if there's ever a market crash? In the 1930s Great Depression in America, there was a largely free market.
I mean, is he even trying? And here's something else they say over and over again. After the single biggest increase in banking regulations of any civilization of the world up to that point with the Federal Reserve Act, they just say, "Oh, it was a free market," even though you had the Fed throwing cheap credit around everywhere. Almost 100 years after the Federal Reserve Act, you had the 2008 financial crisis, which statists still said was a free market. Just like when Obamacare was being debated, they were claiming that healthcare was a free market, despite over 50 years of government intervention, making it the most regulated market other than banking. And again, how much do they have to support their claim that it was a free market? Absolutely nothing whatsoever. Even if Rothbard hadn't written his book on the Great Depression, even if myself and a bunch of others hadn't made all sorts of videos, written articles, and published other information about how it was government that was responsible, it still wouldn't matter. Again, we are under no obligation to disprove something they never bothered to prove.
It wasn't until intervention in the economy that things gradually started to improve, and that eventually the war stimulated the economy back to full health.
An absolutely ridiculous claim that I and others have disproven, which, yet again, he did nothing to support in the first place, so we didn't have to. But we still did anyway. It wasn't until after the war, when government massively pulled back on taxes and spending, that the economy finally recovered. We've shown the data on this. He's shown nothing.
I don't see how thinking, yeah, let's just leave this until it gets better by itself, assuming it ever will, is something people would actually want to do.
Well, maybe if people like you stopped lying to them, it would be a different story. Like, why didn't you mention the 1921 crash, which was actually worse than the 29 crash, but the government did nothing and the economy recovered in a year? Why is it only when government tries to meddle in it to fix it, like they did in 1929, like they did in 2009, and like they're doing now, that economic recessions seem to go on for years?
When it's been proven in the past that intervention actually makes things recover faster.
Does he even name one time when that's been shown to be the case? Of course not.
Another actually really important part of anarcho-capitalism is how it deals with immigrants and refugees. Basically, ANCAPs say that no immigrants can be allowed into a country.
Lie! 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 Man, I have never, ever encountered a statist with the chutzpah to make this claim. Anarcho-capitalists believe that state borders are illegitimate, so there wouldn't even be the concept of immigration in an ANCAP society. It would just be moving.
Not that I'm sure who would be running the border control.
No one, and you know it. You are a liar.
Basically what this means is that an immigrant needs to be given a job already before they can come into a country, as well as they need private property to live on.
This isn't even the case when your holy government tries to stop it. They find jobs. They find places to stay, even with government actively trying to stop them. So why wouldn't this be the case if there were no government at all? This is what's happening, folks. He can't agree with what we really say, so he tells bald-faced lies, doesn't even try to support them, and hopes you'll fall for it.
What really tops it off, though, what really gets me all about this is that, for the most part, ANCAPs won't even refute these points.
Seriously? This is nothing but one huge video full of PRATT. Every single claim you've made has been refuted by us over and over and over and over and over again. You can't handle that. So all you can do is lie.
Well, let me tell you, ANCAPs, it really, really is your job to provide a functioning society.
More collectivist garbage. There is no society. Only individuals. He has this grand plan for how he thinks everyone else should be running their lives, but he doesn't seem to realize that no one's going to care what he thinks. It'll be whatever narcissistic psychopaths can manage to get themselves into power who'll be making that decision. At any rate, it absolutely is his job to prove the claims he's making, and he hasn't even tried to prove a single one of them. And some of them are even bald-faced lies.
Even if you don't think communism would work at all, at least our actual goal is to create a society that's fair and livable. I can't really say the same for anarcho-capitalism.
Do you see the smarminess? Do you see the arrogance? Quite a lot of it for someone who didn't even try to prove what he was saying, who even had to resort to outright lies about what we believe. So, the moral of the story is, who are you gonna believe? The statists, who have the burden of proof, who make all sorts of wild assertions, and who don't even try to back it up with anything, and even resort to outright lies? Or the anarcho-capitalists, who don't have the burden of proof, but do everything we can to provide data and evidence anyway? Which one of us do you think wants to give people information so that they can make the best decisions for themselves? And which of us wants to deceive others and engage in intellectual bullying so they can force their psychopathic policy on everyone? The answer seems pretty clear to me. Hey, thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe and keep these videos coming by donating, becoming a subscriber and getting special benefits, or even for free with airtime. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.